The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Welcome back, everyone, to Security Weekly's virtual hacker summer camp. I'm Paul Asadorian. I am joined by no stranger to the show, Ferruh Mavituna, the CEO of Netsparker. Ferruh, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Nice to be here again.
Yes, nice to have you. It's interesting. I wear lots of hats, right? Sometimes it's hacking and exploiting things. Sometimes it's building software. Sometimes it's scanning things, right? And I haven't made the full circle back around to go, what are all those subtle differences between the DASTs today? Because a lot of things have changed since I've done an in-depth study. Things in web applications and browsers change all the time, and no one person could keep up without the help of tooling, right? So, Ferruh, I want to hear from you. And some of the, if people are out there shopping in the virtual, Black Hat Expo, what are some of the major differences and considerations when you're looking for a DAST solution?
Yeah. So I think one of the big deals is with the DAST. And, I remember when we first started doing Netsparker 10 years ago, when we take it to the market, there were some shortcomings, right? We would have missed some vulnerabilities because we never getting around to add them and all that. And I remember having this challenge hey, look, our challenge is we go to a customer and it's almost like we are selling them antivirus, but we tell them, hey, we missed 40% of the viruses.
Right.
Why would they even buy it, right? They will just pick something that picks up 99%. So while that's a simplification of the situation, I think that's the core challenge with DAST. So from a buyer point of view and from a user point of view, you want to buy something that doesn't miss vulnerabilities, meaning high coverage. And when I say coverage like two things in DAST, dynamic scanning. Mm-hmm. So one is, can you even find the link? Can you even find the endpoint to attack? And the other one, if you have the endpoint almost, delivered to you, can you find the vulnerability? So that's parts of the coverage, right? If you cannot find the link or the endpoint, well, you're not going to be able to find the vulnerability. But even if you have the endpoint, will you even find the vulnerability?
It's the same thing with a testing process of any kind for any software, right? Is you have to find all of the entry points, basically, in any. This goes back to QA 20 years ago when we were testing static applications on the desktop, right? We had to physically make a plan to make sure we could find all the functionality. Then we had to make sure we tested all that functionality and didn't miss anything. That basic software principles hasn't changed in, 60 years, right?
Absolutely. To be honest, if we were to simplify a lot of things, you would put security under QA somewhere, but
agreed. I agree.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. And if you think about unit testing, it's the very same concept, right? Mm-hmm. You always got hey, what is your unit testing coverage? So meaning how much of your code is actually being tested, and security got the exact same challenge. So which brings us to hold this DAST challenge where, okay, so if you want a DAST to be, I would say acceptable level, your baseline is so high, it's unbelievable. Historically, I remember talking with developers and trying to explain them what a web application security scanner is. Mm-hmm. And they would immediately assume, okay, but it wouldn't work for my application because, it's all JavaScript. So they wouldn't even guess that there's a possibility that it might support JavaScript because it seems so far-fetched to them. which I thought was quite funny.
Well, and that's the legacy, Ferruh, that we have to deal with Dast, right? And things we try and highlight on the show. Like, we're very well aware that a lot of modern applications today have some JavaScript in them somewhere, right? Regardless of what, like we write an application in Python, but we have JavaScript, as well. Most web applications do. And I think part of the Dast kind of criteria is how well you can implement a full browser as part of your test, which before that may have never been the case, and that's the perception people are running under is, it's just some external scanner. Whereas today, many modern DAS, Netsparker included, right, have a full browser, right? You guys using Chromium, right, under the hood, so it's a full browser, right? You need that.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, even back in the day, like we started with Internet Explorer, which was like kind of a de facto at the time for the web applications. But like you have to do it, like even from the first day we had it, because otherwise, it's not even worth doing it, because like, hey, if you cannot crawl 60% of random applications, then like what are you even doing?
Right. Yeah, the web applications changed to require the browser to be able to interpret them and get the, access all of the functionality in the applications, basically what it comes down to.
Absolutely. So like the thing is with that, so you gotta like that very high bar said you gotta support JavaScript, you gotta support all this crazy framework, single page applications, like jQuery kind of very standard components, like everything needs to, work. And then once that's there, then your coverage needs to be there in terms of finding vulnerabilities. And if you think about coverage, there are like two key components, which is like a very old school CGI scanning.
Yep.
I think better way to put it. Like, hey, there's a known vulnerability and you need to check something whether it exists or not, which is important, but not necessarily challenging or very hard to do.
Right. And still present in applications today, I've noticed there are still request arguments being passed through the application. And even single page applications all have some functionality where they're passing a request argument, right? It just happens.
Yeah, definitely. So like, I think, looking at Dast, the way I position Dast, like, putting a couple of, let's say, very generalization and the categories, right? So you have Dast like, Netsparker, where the technology has been improved like over many, many years. And it's been used and adopted by like large user base. And R&D focused on actually solving this very problem of dynamic application secret scanning. And then you got other kind of Dast, which is like, hey guys, we do something else, but I think we can sell our customers Dast as well. So let's just sell them something.
Right.
Which generally boils down to the fact, okay, look, we don't need to find everything. Let's find the most obvious things in the most obvious places, like cross-site scripting and SQL injection or something like that. And we don't need to support JavaScript or not that well. We don't need to support complex authentications. So it's kind of like a light Dast that like we call it internally actually. So hey, it's a Dast. Is it really a Dast? No, not really. It's like a very light version of what you would expect from a complete Dast.
No, I completely agree. And there are those technologies on the market. And I mean, sometimes they do have their place, but you have to realize the limitations, right? How much of the scope of the application you're going to miss, and entire classes of vulnerabilities that you're going to miss, right, as well.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right. I think this is where it gets to the part of like budget investment kind of concerns. Okay, like what do we need? How much we need it? And we have customers, for example, they onboard everything on the mission critical on our side, but they're a bit reluctant to onboard everything else, and they keep like these really simple solutions and all of that. And they slowly move as they feel like, oh, what else needs to also be secure?
Right.
Look at. But I think the real challenge, and this is this is just my view, to be honest. I think they're just laser focused on solving one problem versus giving a service or doing something else as your core business. It just changes the company and the DNAs. So today we have a company of like over 220 people with a massive R&D team, right? So just focusing on like 95% of that team is purely focused on Dast in many levels, either development, research, and like bunch of stuff around it. So you do this for decades and more than a decade, And that's now your DNA. Now everyone in the company knows what we are doing, how we are doing, what our approach. Like, let me give you an example how this affects in real world. So when customer comes back to us and say, hey, I'm scanning this very, very, very complex website and it takes like 30 hours, right? Or it doesn't finish the scan. We never ever say, oh, like, okay, too bad for you. It's a big website, so it's not possible. No, we don't do that. So we are like, okay, that's a bug. Like, there is no website in the world that should take more than 48 hours, because there is no website in the world that has, let's say, 7,000 truly unique different code, backed pages. So if a scan takes that long, it must be a problem about our scanner or how it's been configured. And even if it's a configuration, then we think about it and say, okay, we can manually configure this, but why didn't we do that configuration automatically?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Are there any limitation around it? And now the kind of feature is here. Okay, can we do that in machine learning? Like, okay, whatever possibilities here, because we don't dismiss it as like, oh, it's a problem, we don't care and learn to live with it. We are like, hey, this is literally what we do as a company. We innovate in that, we solve this, and this needs to be solved. Because when my customer has 5,000 websites, and they do have more websites, certain customers, I cannot go back to and tell them, configure your 5,000 website correctly, because, well, that's not a possible task. So what is the realistic approach here? How can I detect 95% of the configuration just automatically?
Yeah, I think of it, having worked for a vulnerability scanning company, we had these, a lot of these discussions around this topic. And I think what it comes down to is like the three legs of a stool, right? Because you have to have the best performance possible. You have to minimize false positives and false negatives, and balancing those three things together, especially in a web application, is super, super hard. And like you're saying, Ferruh, if you don't have the dedication to that and the R&D, you're not going to have those conversations all the time. I'm sure it's a daily conversation for you that basically boils down to like, how do we balance all three of these things for all these vulnerabilities and web applications out there, right?
Yeah. And that's really it, like this is what you sleep, like this is what you think, this is what you do. And I think, to be honest, we got another advantage and not many companies do have. So I am the original founder. I originally written the code started in 2006. So started to write Netsparker. So now being the CEO of the company, now the whole company culture is around, hey, we got to do the best product. It has to be the best. It has to have the best coverage, best performance. And if my team come back to me and this happens, they're like, oh, yeah, there's no way this website can be scanned more than 30 hours. I'm like, bring it to me. Let's go. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. Here's what you see. Let's go.
Yeah.
So that's like, that's an example of, hey, I don't take no for an answer for that, because I know for a fact that's doable. Like, you have to prove me why it's not doable. I don't have to prove you, because I already told you how it's, how it's doable.
Right. Because as soon as
that, again, changes how a company approaches to their dust.
Yeah, because as soon as you think it is a one-off, I mean, it's probably not. With the number of web applications we have today, if one customer comes to you with that, that issue that you found or didn't find, right, because you want to improve the product, there's got to be other web applications that are doing something similar, right? Like, no one has the unique unicorn of web applications. I mean, maybe there's a couple, but most of the time, when you're addressing that issue, right, it's because there's more stuff out there like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. And, one of the rules that we set up really early, like how we approach the regression testing, right? You talked about it. Because the biggest challenge here today is the balancing act. So while you are doing improvements, you can quickly be burned by actually start breaking the old stuff that you used to identify, you used to very successfully handle. Or now you are slow and you need to optimize it.
I do that all the time in my code. I break stuff I'm like, great new feature. I'm like, I broke something else, right? And so I can imagine the regression testing that Netsparker has to go through with the complexity of being able to scan all these web applications.
Oh, yeah. Like, I mean, I'm going to ignore all the whole QA process and all that. But if I focus just one piece of the regression testing, kind of like pretty much unique to our product. And, so something we built internally, we put vulnerable applications and vulnerable particular test cases. And also we put false positives, true positives. And we do so like both false positive testing and also like kind of all do we find the vulnerability that we should be finding, but also do we find false positives, right? Like, so all that makes, all the possibilities. And I think today, I might be wrong on the numbers, but it should be like 4,500 test cases here deployed, like all these unique cases. Imagine a cross-site scripting, but we got like 740 variations of it.
Right.
And with like all these different setups. And we even got like more, generator testing. Imagine a cross-site scripting, but hey, do we find it when it's in 404? Do we find it when it's 500? Do we find it if there's this beginning, if there's this ending? So like all these complex cases, and we actually got a system to automatically generate those test cases, and just like every single build, or like, sometimes we run it on schedule based because it's just too heavy at a certain point.
Yep.
Run on that automation. And whenever something is wrong, it like raises a ticket immediately. So kind of like think about secure SDLC, how you want to hear your bugs. So like very good QA process on that. But just focusing on our domain and how we solve this. So once a customer says, I missed this, you missed this vulnerability, we fix it, and we fix it for good because now it's on a test automation. So it should never, ever be broken again.
Right. And that's important. And oftentimes folks don't talk about their own internal processes you've described. And the process you've described is one I'm striving for in our own internal software, right? Because that's the place you have to be. You have to be able to very quickly and easily regression test for security on just an automated basis so that developers can focus on implementing new features and know if that works or not, or if they broke something else in the process, right?
Definitely. And that's like, when we talk about secure SDLC, that's exactly the same philosophy, right? Like as you said, to be honest, a lot of things security is doing is just trying to replicate what is already defined and well executed in software development field.
True.
Hey, look, like Agile is very well defined, and the QA within Agile is very well defined, and the best practices more or less are same. And now we are just trying to catch up on security to that. So it's not like that's complicated. The path is there. But the fact that there's massive complication technically to get there, which is where I think why I personally believe innovation and technological advancement within the security product is key to the success. And the vision of it is, while important, not necessarily takes a genius. Like almost anyone can see it who is doing this, but like only a few can execute it to that level. And if someone don't see it, it's mostly when we talk to the customers, it's quite often you explain them the situation, and they're at a point like, okay, look, I didn't know any product was even doing this, so I wasn't asking for it. So I'm like not really intrigued that you're explaining this concept because it makes a lot of sense. But like I wouldn't have expected any product to be doing it because their expectations of Battista is so low. It's kind of like kind of changing their mind immediately when we talk about like all the stuff that we can do.
Well, and it's a great point, Ferruh. If you've got these, perceptions about a DAST, good, bad, or indifferent, and there's any hesitation, I encourage people to go to securityweekly.com/Netsparker. Go get the trial and try it out for yourself. And I mean, we use it here internally. Been using it actually for some time, and it's fantastic balance. It comes back to that balance of performance and reduction of false positive and false negatives. And you guys have a great product in balancing all those three things. So go try it out. Ferruh, thank you so much for appearing on Security Weekly.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thank you.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back with, guess what, more interviews. Stay tuned. It is the Security Weekly Virtual Hacker Summer Camp. I am Paul Asadorian. It is beer o'clock. That's right. So I've cracked open the beers. It's all downhill from here. But keeping us on the upswing is Mr. Paul Battista. He's the CEO and founder of Polarity. Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. I know. It's nice to have you on the show. Now, Paul, you did kind of a survey, asked a question of the security community. Why don't you tell us about that?
I did. We asked, what's more important, speed or thoroughness when it comes to incident response? And, it's one of those kind of age-old questions, even in pen testing or hunting. When you're a pen tester, it's like you got to find all the vulnerabilities, not just the one to let you in. When you're an incident responder, you got to find all the machines that are intruded upon, not just the first
obvious
one to
ones.
be intruded upon. So, we were kind of curious. which one's more important. We understand there's value in both.
And what were some of the results of this survey?
Yeah, so it was pretty even. So we saw decent split. Let's see, it was 42% said speed and 58% said thoroughness, which to us was close enough that said, hey, it's close enough that it's even, and there's a balance. And if someone's focusing on one, they're definitely failing at their job. And this is one of those things that's kind of true to our heart, and kind of what we do at Polarity is trying to help folks with that balance. And there were some interesting kind of comments on the poll as well, like folks that said, straight up came out and said, hey, it's both. There's a balance. In fact, one CISO of a large financial even commented, I'll get the quote right here, given finite time, completeness is a function of speed. And he linked to a Pink Floyd video of pudding versus meat,
right,
as you would expect.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, and I also imagine that the matrix of speed and thoroughness goes a lot deeper than just the two major categories, right? Because having worked in a security organization, there are things that you can do fast, and there are things that take a lot longer, and then there are things that you can do thoroughly, and then things not so thoroughly, and they all kind of intertwine. And that may not be like an overarching statistic. I think is great, but you may be really good at this aspect of your incident response program, but when it comes to web application vulnerabilities or ransomware, there's some things where you fall down in either category, right?
Yeah, I think there's areas where more attention is needed, right? Where you need to be extra thorough. And then there's, those rabbit holes, those kind of areas you dive down and you're distracted, and maybe you shouldn't be down in that rabbit hole for too long. This is where actually have right here on my desk, I have, if that comes through on Zoom there, I have a little timer I like to flip over and time box myself on some things to 3 minutes and then get back to it. Is it worth going down that rabbit hole further, or should I pull out and get back to the task at hand?
Right, and that's one of the things that as an analyst is super difficult, because you can work off of some kind of indicator and then go, all right, I'm going to start pulling in all this other data. To get this other data, I have to go to these other systems, and I'm all over the place, and you're down this rabbit hole. And sometimes the results are not great, right? And by results, I mean, it could be that you didn't find anything, which is an important finding, right? Or it could be that you did find something and action is required. And just being able to quickly go down those paths, I think, is really something that, Polarity can certainly help us with, right? Because as an analyst, you're pulling in data and correlating it, and to do that more quickly is the mission that you're basically on, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was a pen tester, red teamer, there was natural time boxes built into projects engagements, right? So you'd say, hey, this is a 2-week project, or I have 1 day to test this web app. And you didn't always have enough time, but you were contracted to work those hours, and you did as much as you can in that limited time. When I got into incident response, it was a little different, because you need to respond quickly and follow the steps of proper incident response. But at the same time, there's moving too quickly, and you could easily make mistakes. So what we found ourselves doing was taking IP addresses and host names involved in incident response and putting them up on a whiteboard. So we jot down, hey, this IP is bad guy 1, this IP is bad guy 2, this machine is intruded upon, and it'd be that big network, right? Like you see in a crime show with threads tied between them.
Yeah.
And at some point, that whiteboard got too full. We'd clear it, we'd take a picture with our cell phone, then clear it off and start again. And so then at that point, not only would we go back and check the whiteboard to see if something was new that we saw, but we'd have to check the picture. And on the second picture, it was like, all right, this is not really sustainable. We need to work on our processes. We need to figure out a better way of keeping track. Have we seen this before? Is this new? Have we checked all the proper intel sources to figure out if it's something that the industry is already tracking as badness, or is this a targeted attack? So as that problem got bigger and bigger and compiled, it really did inspire us to create Polarity.
And you know what's also very interesting, Paul, when I was doing a lot of investigations and there was a network team and I was teaching them as much about security as I could and vice versa, they would teach me as much about networking, there would be some kind of incident. And the worst possible scenario, I think, or one of the worst, is when I, as a security engineer, I'd go down a path and investigate something. The network engineer, one of them, would go down a similar path, and then we compare notes, and maybe we got the same result. Either it was something we needed to pay attention to, or I'd compare notes and we go, yeah, that was like a rabbit hole. That was just an anomaly, and it wasn't a big deal. And we look at each other and both how much time did you spend on that? I spent a couple hours, and they spent a couple of hours. Now you start adding that together as your team gets larger, right? I think what your platform does is allow us to communicate and feed off of each other's data so that collectively we're saving time. It's not just about one person, but about the entire team.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the same problem a lot when I was government. So I worked as an intel officer, and it's, in the intel community, it is a cliched issue, right? Two analysts both working on the same thing. Mm-hmm. They don't know about one another. And then it always comes back to that you have different pieces of the puzzle.
Yes.
They don't collaborate and communicate. Intelligence failure. Of course, you have the duplication of work as you just described. That's a problem too, a waste of resources. But when it's different pieces of the puzzle, and if they don't connect, that's a big problem. And so for us, we try to figure out how do we solve that in a better way. The current way at the time was force the analysts into a common workflow. So force them to go into some common dashboard or common investigation management platform. So one analyst needs to log in, put their notes in. Second analyst needs to log in, put their own notes in. Hopefully they get connected. If there's 3 analysts, it's 3 actions. If there's 100 analysts, it's 100 actions. So when we built Polarity, we said, well, how can we make it so that each of those analysts gets to use the workflows that they're familiar with and the tools that they like to use, and then we just overlay that information with augmented reality on top of their screen to give them that context and connect those individuals, hopefully, completing that puzzle, if you will.
Right. And I know some people hear the term augmented reality, but really that's what Paul and his team have built is an augmented reality experience, basically not just in your browser, but other applications on your computer, correct?
Yeah, it's in software, not just browser. So we, being security professionals, we knew that it's important to run on command line, terminal, whether it's PowerShell or CMD or terminal, all those are important. Whether you're Windows, Mac, or Linux, that's important. If you're detonating malware inside of a VM, we need to be able to run right on top of that. So what we set out to do is, hey, let's analyze the pixels on the screen and run computer vision algorithms on those, and then highlight and give that context based on those pixel values. That gives us the ultimate flexibility to really provide context and that awareness everywhere in every tool, not just in a web browser, or not just in the dashboard or the workflow management technology you might be using.
Well, what are some of the newer features you've built in, Paul, that give the analysts some great context and collaboration too?
Yeah, so some of the newer enterprise features has been really kind of giving awareness back to coworkers you should be talking to and getting those conversations triggered. We're always, ourselves and in the community is always building integrations. And, it's times like this at Black Hat to kind of take a step back and look, hey, Black Hat 2016 is when we actually released and came out of closed beta. And, since then we've been focused on government and enterprise customers. And so now we're kind of circled back and said, all right, how do we give back to the community? We're in level 10 of Jumanji right now. How do we give back to the community and create an edition that they can use for free and give some of that value back? So that's been one of our big, more recent pushes, something we've, giving early access to folks at Black Hat and folks who are watching the show right now, trying to get folks early access to our community edition, get the value of Polarity, get the value of those overlays at no cost.
So the goal is not to just have a trial, but have a community edition with a limited feature set that the community can use completely for free?
That's right. So we had enough of our customers and users who would use Polarity at work, and they say, hey, I'm a researcher at home. Can I use Polarity at home? And, of course we said yes, but it was kind of clear that, hey, there's a big community of researchers, people who care about their jobs, people who like to learn, and, they're working in their spare time. And so we wanted to make sure we had an edition for them. And the other thing that was a catalyst is we surpassed the 100 integration mark. So these are open source projects built on top of Polarity. And I think we're at about 119 now, actually. And so these are built by those users. They're built by customers, partners, and some of them are built by us. And we said, all right, well, with this big of a community-driven effort to build on top of the platform, we really do need to open this up more widely.
That's really awesome. Well, what are some of those integrations, Paul, for our audience? Like, what can they expect if they're trying to, visualize and think of, I've got this thing, it's overlaying on my screen. What kind of information can it tell them?
Yeah, so an integration is basically three things. You define what to recognize on the screen, what actions to take, and what information to overlay. Mm-hmm. So as an example, if you want to recognize a CVE number, check Google or other sources for exploits, and then overlay links to those exploits, you can do that as an integration. If you want to look for an IP or a host name, and then check your asset management database and get the context in the asset, you can do that. If you want to recognize an IP address or file hash and check threat intelligence platforms, whether it's your tip or whether it's a threat intel feed, you can do that. And so basically you define those three things: what to recognize, what actions to take, and what to overlay, and you have an integration.
And so is the idea with the community edition to allow people to supply those integrations and make those freely available to the community as well?
Yeah, we want to get to a state where folks in the community edition can build on top of the platform right now. Right now, it's our enterprise customers are doing a lot of that building, and our partners. So yeah, the plan is to enable the community to also build. Out of the gate right now, they'll get to pick from a set of existing integrations. They'll get to pick 3 different integrations to install. So that could be your various tip platforms or data sources, other data sources. Sometimes it might be just a conversion. Maybe you just want a fast conversion of base 64 to human readable, or epoch epic time to human readable thing.
Oh, super useful. Really 2 super useful things, right? Especially if you're developing or doing CTFs or pen testing, right?
Yep, absolutely.
That's awesome.
And you can chain these things together. You can fire off playbooks. So if you have an orchestration platform already connected to orchestration, maybe you want buttons there to quickly fire off a playbook.
That's awesome. And I love the ability to connect it to more public resources as well as your internal applications as well. I think that's a super important part of the platform, right?
Yeah. So for the community edition, it's able to connect to the public data sets. So the things that are internet accessible, I should say. And with the enterprise edition, obviously you bring the server in-house. So it's an on-prem server, and then you can connect it to whatever you want to connect it to internal as well.
That's awesome. What are some of the differences between the community and commercial versions other than what you've already mentioned?
Yeah, so that's one of the big ones. The on-prem server gives you those connections. The other thing is integration. So we limited the community edition to 3 integrations. The enterprise edition, you don't have that limit. And the other thing that's on the enterprise side that's not in the community right now is annotation. So with enterprise, you can annotate something on the fly. So you can see an IP address, say, hey, I want to keep track of this. You annotate it with your mouse, and then the next time you see it on your screen, it'll show you that annotation that you took.
That's fantastic. And I'm assuming people can go to polarity.io/SW and hit that page, and they're able to submit their information to get a pre-release of the community edition. Is that?
That's right. So for listeners of the show, early access to the community edition. So the actual, we're opening it up for Black Hat. So that's Wednesday, Thursday, tomorrow. So be patient, sign up today, but you'll see an email from us shortly after with getting you all set up.
Paul, thank you so much for appearing on Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Glad we didn't lose power. And
glad you stayed.
I didn't lose power. I'm on generator, but glad you didn't lose power at Unity Studios.
Glad you stayed with us. And for our listeners, visit polarity.io/SW and get your early access to the community edition. Paul, thanks again.
Thank you, Paul.
More interviews coming up next. Stay tuned.